The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1882, informing Sophia Montgomery that her engagement to Philadelphia banker Edmund Hartwell had been terminated due to her regrettable Irish accent that diminishes the dignity of polite society. She stood in the middle of her aunt's parlor, the paper trembling in her hands, wondering how a voice that had belonged to her mother and grandmother before her could be considered shameful enough to destroy her future. Her Aunt Clara pursed her lips and set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "I warned you, Sophia. You never should have spoken so freely at those dinner parties. Your brogue is quite pronounced, and it does make you sound rather simple." Sophia folded the telegram carefully, her fingers pressing hard creases into the expensive paper. "I see. Now, do not sulk. Perhaps if you had taken my advice and practiced your elocution more diligently, this unfortunate situation could have been avoided. A woman must adapt to her circumstances if she wishes to marry well." The words stung like salt in an open wound, but Sophia kept her face composed. She had spent the last 3 years in Philadelphia, trying to soften the lilt of her voice, trying to round her vowels the way the American ladies did, trying to be someone other than herself. It had not been enough. "I think I shall take some air," Sophia said quietly, moving toward the door before her aunt could launch into another lecture about her failings. Outside, the September sun felt warm on her face, but it did nothing to thaw the cold not forming in her chest. She walked without direction, her boots clicking against the cobblestones, until she found herself at the train station. The departures board listed destinations she had never heard of, places that sounded wild and far from the stifling parlors of Philadelphia society. Her eyes caught on one listing: train departing for Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, with connections to smaller towns throughout the region. Something shifted inside her, a reckless impulse she had been suppressing for years under layers of propriety and proper behavior. She had money of her own, a modest inheritance from her mother that her aunt could not touch. She had no real ties to Philadelphia beyond a failed engagement, and an aunt who thought her accent made her sound foolish. What was keeping her here? 2 days later, Sophia found herself on a westbound train with a single trunk of belongings and a one-way ticket to Utah Territory. The other passengers gave her curious glances, a young woman traveling alone, but she kept her eyes on the window and watched as the cities gave way to endless plains, then to mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The journey took over a week, with stops and connections and nights spent in dusty railroad hotels. By the time she reached Salt Lake City, her traveling dress was wrinkled and her hair had come loose from its pins, but she felt more alive than she had in years. At the Salt Lake Depot, she inquired about smaller settlements where a woman might find work as a teacher or shopkeeper. The clerk, a weathered man with kind eyes, suggested Monticello in the southeastern corner of the territory. "They are building a town there," he explained. "Not much to it yet, but they need all sorts of folks willing to work hard. Beautiful country near the mountains. A bit isolated but peaceful." Peaceful sounded good. Isolated sounded even better. The stage to Monticello left the following morning, a bone-rattling affair that carried her and 3 other passengers south through landscapes that took her breath away. Red rocks rose from the earth like ancient cathedrals, and pine forests climbed steep mountain slopes. The air tasted different here, sharp and clean, nothing like the coal smoke of Philadelphia. Monticello itself was barely a town, just a handful of wooden buildings clustered around a dirt main street, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding valleys. The stage driver deposited her at the only boarding house, a 2-story structure that looked like it had been built just months before. Mrs. Ruth Davies, the proprietress, was a sturdy woman in her 50s who took one look at Sophia and nodded approvingly. "You have got spine, I can see it in your eyes. Come inside, dear. You look exhausted." The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Sophia sank onto the bed and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since receiving that telegram. She had traveled 2,000 miles on impulse, with only a vague plan and determination not to let anyone else make her feel small again. That evening, over a hearty supper of venison stew, Mrs. Davies explained the situation in Monticello. "We have got about 40 families settled here, maybe 200 people all told. Started getting serious about building the town last year. We need a proper school teacher, a seamstress, someone to help at the general store." "What are your skills, Miss Montgomery?" "I can teach," Sophia said. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history. I can keep accounts, and I am not afraid of hard work." "That accent," Mrs. Davies said thoughtfully. "Irish." Sophia stiffened, preparing herself for another lecture about how foolish she sounded. "Yes, County Cork originally, though I have lived in America for 7 years. My husband was Irish, God rest his soul, County Galway. I always loved the music of how he spoke." Mrs. Davies smiled warmly. "You will do just fine here, dear. Folks in Monticello care more about what you can do than how you sound doing it." The knot in Sophia's chest loosened slightly. The next morning, Mrs. Davies introduced her to the town council, 3 men who met in the back room of the general store. They were enthusiastic about hiring a teacher and offered her a small salary plus room and board in exchange for teaching the dozen or so children currently in town, with more families expected to arrive before winter. "School building is not finished yet," explained Mr. Peterson, a rancher with sun-weathered skin. "But you can hold classes in the church for now. When can you start?" "Monday," Sophia said firmly, and so she began her new life. The children ranged from 6 to 14, bright-eyed and curious, most of them the sons and daughters of Mormon settlers who had come south to establish new communities. They did not care about her accent. They cared that she knew how to make lessons interesting, that she was patient when they struggled with their letters, that she treated each of them with respect. She had been teaching for 3 weeks when Lucas Quinn first appeared. It was a Friday afternoon, and Sophia was helping young Emma Peterson with her arithmetic when the church door swung open. The man who entered had to duck his head to clear the frame. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed carved from granite and arms roped with muscle visible even beneath his worn buckskin shirt. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and several days of beard stubbled his strong jaw. He carried a rifle with the casual ease of someone who knew how to use it, and his eyes, a striking gray-green, swept the room before landing on Sophia. Every child in the room turned to look. "Mr. Quinn." Several of the boys called out excitedly. The giant man nodded to them, a small smile softening his hard features before his gaze returned to Sophia. "Madam, sorry to interrupt. Brought in fresh meat for the Davies place. Ruth said I might find the new teacher here." Sophia stood, smoothing her skirts and trying not to stare. She had seen large men before, but Lucas Quinn had a presence that filled the entire church. He moved with surprising grace for his size, crossing the room toward her with long, measured strides. "I am Miss Montgomery," she said, extending her hand. "The teacher." His hand engulfed hers, calloused and warm, and his grip was gentle despite the obvious strength behind it. "Lucas Quinn. Most folks call me by my first name. I live up in the mountains, trap and hunt mostly. Bring supplies down to town once a month or so." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Lucas," Sophia said, very aware of how the Irish lilt colored his name on her tongue. Something flickered in his eyes, an expression she could not quite read. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Montgomery. Please call me Sophia." Sophia. The way he said her name with deliberate care and attention made her breath catch slightly. "Pretty name, suits you." Before she could respond, young Tommy Davies piped up. "Mr. Quinn, did you see any bears this month? Last time you said there was a grizzly near your cabin." Lucas turned his attention to the boy, and Sophia watched as he answered the children's eager questions with patience and quiet humor. He had brought down an elk, he told them, and had indeed seen the grizzly again, though from a safe distance. He described tracking mountain lions and spotting a golden eagle's nest high in the cliffs. The children hung on every word, and Sophia found herself equally captivated. Lucas Quinn was a mountain man through and through, rough and weathered, but there was intelligence in his eyes and kindness in the way he spoke to the children. When the questions finally subsided, Lucas touched the brim of his hat. "I should let you get back to your lessons. Just wanted to introduce myself proper." "Thank you for stopping by," Sophia said. "You are welcome to visit the school anytime." He nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. "I might just do that, Sophia." The way he said her name again, slow and deliberate, sent warmth spreading through her chest. Then he was gone, ducking through the doorway and disappearing into the afternoon sunlight. Emma Peterson giggled. "He likes you, Miss Montgomery." "Back to your arithmetic, Emma," Sophia said, but she could feel her cheeks warming. That evening, as Sophia helped Mrs. Davies prepare supper, the older woman brought up Lucas without prompting. "So you met our mountain man." "He seems very capable," Sophia said carefully. "Lucas is a good man. Keeps to himself mostly. Lives in a cabin up in the Abajo Mountains about 8 miles from here. Been in these parts for 5 years or so. Helped build half the structures in town. Always brings fresh meat when we need it. Helped fight off some cattle rustlers last year. Folks here respect him." "Does he have family?" "Not that I know of. Came out here alone and stayed that way. Some of the women have tried to catch his interest over the years, but he has never shown much inclination toward courting." Mrs. Davies gave Sophia a knowing look. "Until today, perhaps. I have not seen him come into town outside his usual schedule in 2 years." "I am sure he was just being neighborly," Sophia protested. Mrs. Davies said, unconvinced. Sophia tried to put Lucas Quinn out of her mind as she settled into her routines. She taught 5 days a week, spent her evenings preparing lessons and reading, and on Sundays attended church services in the same building where she taught. She wrote letters to her aunt, carefully neutral updates about her new position, and received terse replies reminding her that she could return to Philadelphia if she ever came to her senses. She did not plan to return. Every day in Monticello felt like exhaling after holding her breath for years. The people here judged her on her work, her character, her willingness to contribute to the growing community. Nobody mocked her accent. Nobody told her she sounded foolish. Lucas appeared again 2 weeks later, this time on a Wednesday morning. Sophia was outside with the children during their midday break when she saw him riding down the main street on a sturdy bay horse, leading a pack mule loaded with furs. "Mr. Quinn." The children rushed toward him, and he reined in his horse, greeting them with that small, warm smile that transformed his serious face. Sophia watched from the church steps as he dismounted in one fluid motion and crouched down to the children's level, answering their questions about his latest hunting expedition. He had brought gifts, small carved wooden animals that he distributed among the younger children, each one detailed and smooth from careful work. When he finally extracted himself from the group and approached Sophia, she found herself suddenly nervous. "You spoil them," she said. "Long winter nights up in the cabin, I need something to do with my hands." He pulled one more carving from his pocket, a small bird with outstretched wings. "This one is for you." Sophia took it carefully, marveling at the detail. "It is beautiful, Lucas. You are very talented." "It is a lark," he said. "Heard one near my cabin and thought of you. The way they sing, kind of musical and pretty." The compliment was so unexpected and sincere that Sophia did not know how to respond. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Truly, this is lovely." They stood there for a moment, Sophia holding the carved lark and Lucas looking at her with those intense gray-green eyes. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might like to go for a walk sometime. I know a good trail with a view of the whole valley. Beautiful this time of year with the aspens turning gold." Sophia's heart beat faster. "I would like that very much. Sunday afternoon, after church?" "Yes." His smile, when it came, was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I will be here. Sunday could not come fast enough." Sophia found herself distracted during lessons, her mind wandering to Lucas Quinn and the way he said her name with such careful attention. She caught herself humming while she graded papers, and Mrs. Davies watched her with barely concealed amusement. "You are glowing, dear," the older woman said Friday evening. "I am merely happy with how the students are progressing," Sophia protested. "Of course you are." Sunday dawned clear and beautiful, the October air crisp with the promise of coming winter. Sophia wore her nicest day dress, a deep blue that Mrs. Davies assured her brought out her eyes, and tried not to fidget through the church service. Lucas was waiting outside when she emerged, cleaned up and dressed in actual trousers and a button-up shirt instead of his usual buckskins, though he still wore his worn leather vest. His hair was tied back, revealing the strong lines of his face, and he held a small basket. "Figured we might want a snack," he said, offering his arm. Sophia took it, very aware of the solid muscle beneath her hand and the way they fit together despite their height difference. He walked slowly, matching his longer stride to hers, leading her away from town along a trail that wound up into the foothills. "How long have you been in Monticello, Lucas?" she asked as they walked. 5 years this past summer. Came out from Missouri originally, but I spent a few years up in Montana before drifting south." "What brought you here?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Needed somewhere peaceful, somewhere I could be alone and think. The war, it left marks on a lot of us. I figured the mountains might help heal them." Sophia understood about running from painful pasts. "Did it help? Some. Being up in those mountains, just me and the wilderness, taught me a lot about myself, taught me patience, taught me to appreciate silence and solitude." He glanced at her. "Though I have been finding lately that solitude is not quite as appealing as it used to be." They climbed higher, the aspens forming a golden canopy overhead. Lucas pointed out deer tracks and told her about the wildlife in the area, his voice deep and steady. He asked about her teaching, about her students, and listened with genuine interest as she described their progress and personalities. The trail opened onto a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire valley. Monticello spread below them, tiny and fragile looking against the vast landscape of red rocks and pine forests. Beyond, mountains rose in layers, purple and blue in the distance. "Oh," Sophia breathed. "Lucas, this is magnificent. Thought you might appreciate it." He spread a blanket he had carried in the basket and they sat, the October sun warm on their faces. They ate the simple meal he had packed, bread and cheese and apples, and talked about everything and nothing. Lucas asked about Ireland, and Sophia found herself describing her childhood in Cork with more detail than she had shared with anyone in years. The green hills, the stone cottages, the sound of the sea, her mother's garden. "We came to America when I was 14, she said. "My da thought there would be better opportunities. He found work in Philadelphia and we settled there. My parents both died of influenza 3 years later. My aunt took me in." "I am sorry," Lucas said quietly. "My aunt meant well, but she was very concerned with social standing. She thought my accent was an embarrassment, something I should hide or fix. She sent me to elocution lessons and scolded me every time I let my brogue show." Sophia looked down at her hands. "I was engaged to a man she approved of, a banker who seemed kind enough. But he broke it off because he said my accent made me sound foolish, that it would embarrass him in front of his business associates." Lucas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained anger. "Then he was a damn fool who did not deserve you." Sophia looked up, startled by the vehemence in his tone. "I am not a man of fancy words," Lucas continued, his gray-green eyes intense. "But I know something about being judged for things that do not matter. Your accent is part of who you are, Sophia. It is beautiful. The way you talk, the music in your voice, it is one of the first things I noticed about you. The way my name sounds when you say it, I never heard anything quite like it before." Her throat tightened with emotion. "Lucas, there it is," he said softly, "like that. You say it different than anyone else. Makes it sound important." They sat close together on that blanket, the valley spread before them, and Sophia felt something shift and settle in her chest. Here was a man who liked her voice, who thought the accent her aunt and her former fiancé had found so shameful was beautiful. A man who listened when she spoke and looked at her like she mattered. "Tell me about Missouri," she said. "About your family." Lucas looked out over the valley. "Not much to tell. My father was a blacksmith, worked himself to death trying to keep food on the table. My mother did her best, but there were 6 of us children and never enough to go around. I left when I was 16, worked as a ranch hand, then the war came." "You fought, Union Army." 3 years. Saw things no man should see, did things I wish I could forget. When it ended, I could not go back to Missouri. Could not pretend like everything was normal when I felt like I had left pieces of myself on those battlefields. His jaw tightened. "I headed west, kept moving until I found these mountains. Built my cabin with my own hands, learned to live off the land. It was exactly what I needed." "But lonely," Sophia said gently. "Yes," he admitted. "Lonely. I told myself I preferred it that way, that I was better off alone." Then Ruth Davies mentioned that a new teacher had arrived from Philadelphia, and I found myself making excuses to come into town more often. "To see me." "To see you," he confirmed, meeting her eyes. "That first day when I walked into that church and heard you talking to the children, heard that beautiful accent, saw the way you smiled at them, I think something in me just woke up. Like I had been sleeping for 5 years, and suddenly remembered what it felt like to be alive." Sophia reached for his hand, those large, calloused fingers closing gently around hers. "I am glad you came to town, Lucas Quinn." They stayed on that overlook until the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, talking and watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. When Lucas finally walked her back to town, his hand never left hers, and Sophia felt lighter than she had in years. Over the following weeks, Lucas became a regular presence in Monticello. He still returned to his mountain cabin, but he came to town at least twice a week now, always finding reasons to stop by the school. He brought fresh game for Mrs. Davies, helped repair the church roof, and spent his evenings sitting in the boarding house parlor with Sophia, talking until the fire burned low. The town noticed, of course. Small communities always did, but the attention was warm and approving, not judgmental. Mrs. Davies beamed like a proud mother, and even the most protective parents smiled when they saw Lucas and Sophia together. "Never thought I would see the day Lucas Quinn courted a woman," Mr. Peterson remarked one Sunday after church. "You must be special, Miss Montgomery." "He is the special one," Sophia replied honestly. November arrived with the first real cold, frost sparkling on the ground each morning. Lucas taught Sophia how to identify animal tracks in the snow and showed her which plants could be used for medicine. She read to him from her books in the evenings, and he carved her more small animals, a growing menagerie that lined her windowsill. They kissed for the first time on a cold November evening, standing outside the boarding house under a sky brilliant with stars. Lucas had walked her home after supper as he always did, but this time he paused at the door, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Sophia," he said, her name a question and a prayer. "Yes," she whispered. He bent down and she rose on her toes, meeting him halfway. His lips were warm despite the cold, and the kiss was tender, careful, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath visible in the freezing air. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it has not been long, but I am certain. You are what I have been looking for without knowing I was searching. I love you too, Lucas." The words came easily, naturally, because they were true. "You make me feel like myself again. Like I do not have to hide or change or apologize for who I am." "Never apologize," he said fiercely. "Not to me, not to anyone. You are perfect exactly as you are, Sophia Montgomery." They courted through the winter, weathering the cold months together. When snow closed the mountain passes and made travel difficult, Lucas moved into a small room at the boarding house so he could stay close to town, helping with repairs and hunting for fresh meat. He proposed on Christmas morning, presenting her with a ring he had fashioned himself from silver, delicate and beautiful despite being made by such large, work-roughened hands. "Marry me," he said. "Be my wife. Build a life with me in these mountains." "Yes," Sophia said through happy tears. "Yes, Lucas. Absolutely yes." They married in February 1883 in the same church where Sophia taught her classes, with the entire town crowded inside to witness their vows. Sophia wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Davies had helped her sew, and Lucas stood tall and proud in his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed but still touching his shoulders in the style she loved. When the preacher told him to kiss his bride, Lucas cupped her face gently in his large hands and kissed her with such tenderness and joy that several of the women in attendance openly wept. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing. Lucas was not much of a dancer, but he held Sophia close and swayed with her, whispering how beautiful she was, how lucky he felt, how he could not wait to start their life together. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, Mrs. Davies having discreetly given them the best room and making sure they would not be disturbed. Lucas carried Sophia over the threshold, closing the door behind them and setting her down gently. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his hand settling on her waist. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I am happy. So very happy, Lucas." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, until nervous anticipation melted into warmth and desire. They undressed each other carefully, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered endearments. Lucas was patient and tender, attentive to her needs, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Sophia's head on his broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could have this," Lucas murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "A wife, A partner, someone to build a life with. I thought I was meant to be alone. And I thought my accent would always be something to hide, something shameful. But you made me see it differently. You made me see myself differently. Sophia tilted her head to look up at him. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving this broken-down mountain man a chance, he said with a small smile. You are not broken. You are the strongest man I know in all the ways that matter. They talked into the night, making plans for their future. Lucas's cabin, he explained, was sturdy but small, really only suitable for one person. He wanted to build them a proper home, something bigger and more comfortable, still up in the mountains where he felt most at peace but close enough to town that Sophia could continue teaching. I know your work is important to you, he said. I would never ask you to give that up. We will find a balance, Sophia said confidently. Together. Spring came early that year, the snow melting rapidly to reveal green grass and wildflowers. Lucas began construction on their new home in March, choosing a site in a meadow about 4 miles from town, sheltered by pines and with a creek running nearby. He worked from dawn until dusk, and on weekends, several men from town came up to help, raising walls and setting beams. Sophia continued teaching through the spring term, but she spent her weekends at the cabin site, watching her home take shape. Lucas had designed it larger than necessary, with multiple rooms and wide windows that would let in plenty of light. Planning for a family. Sophia asked one Saturday, standing in what would eventually be their bedroom. Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. If you want children, I know teaching other people's kids might be enough for you. I want children, Sophia said, leaning back against his solid warmth. Your children, a house full of them if we are so blessed. Then I better make this house big enough, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The home was finished by May. A beautiful 2-story structure with a wide porch and a stone fireplace that Lucas built with his own hands. Neighbors helped them move in, bringing gifts of furniture and blankets and preserves. Mrs. Davies cried openly as she hugged Sophia goodbye. You will visit often, Sophia insisted. You are family to me. And you to me, dear girl. Take care of each other. Their first months in the new house were blissful. Sophia continued teaching, riding into town 3 days a week on the gentle mare Lucas had bought for her, while Lucas hunted and trapped and gradually built up their homestead. He planted a garden for her, remembering everything she had told him about her mother's garden in Ireland, and built her a chicken coop because she missed having fresh eggs. In the evenings, they sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, Lucas's arm around her shoulders, complete contentment in the silence between them. Other times, they talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears, growing closer with each passing day. By summer, Sophia suspected she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Lucas, choosing an evening when they were sitting by the creek, the water burbling over smooth stones and the air sweet with pine. Lucas, I have news, she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. He looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. Truly, truly, we are going to have a baby, probably late January or early February. Lucas swept her into his arms, holding her carefully but tightly, his face buried in her hair. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. A baby, our baby. Sophia, I cannot believe it. Believe it, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. You are going to be a father. He kissed her with such joy and reverence that it took her breath away. And you are going to be the most wonderful mother. Our child is so lucky. They told the town the following Sunday, and the community celebrated with them. Mrs. Davies immediately began knitting tiny blankets and sweaters, and the other women offered advice and support. Sophia continued teaching through the fall, though she tired more easily now, and Lucas hovered protectively, making sure she did not overexert herself. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she protested when he tried to lift her onto her horse one October morning. "You are carrying something more precious than gold," he countered. "Let me take care of you," she softened, reaching up to touch his bearded cheek. "You take such good care of me always, Lucas Quinn. Every single day." "Saying my name like that," he murmured, turning his head to kiss her palm. "Still my favorite sound in the world." Winter came hard that year with heavy snows that sometimes trapped them in the house for days at a time. Sophia stopped riding into town to teach after Christmas, too large and uncomfortable to manage the journey safely. Lucas stayed close to home, venturing out only to hunt when necessary, always returning quickly with worry in his eyes until he saw her safe and warm by the fire. Their son was born on a February night in 1884, during a howling blizzard that made getting the midwife from town impossible. Lucas delivered the baby himself, his large hands surprisingly gentle and steady, talking Sophia through each contraction with calm assurance even though she could see the fear in his eyes. "One more push," he encouraged. "You are doing so well, love, so strong, just one more." The baby's first cry filled the cabin, loud and healthy, and Lucas wrapped him in a clean blanket before placing him in Sophia's arms. "A boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son." Sophia looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant, overwhelmed with love so fierce it hurt. "He is perfect. Lucas, look at him. He is absolutely perfect." Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Sophia, and together they marveled at the miracle they had created. The baby had Sophia's dark hair and Lucas's strong chin, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the same gray-green as his father's. "What should we name him?" Lucas asked. They had discussed names for months, unable to agree, but now, looking at their son, Sophia knew. "Liam. It is an Irish name, means strong-willed warrior, and for a middle name, maybe after you, Liam Lucas Quinn." "Liam," Lucas repeated, testing it out. His eyes met Sophia's, understanding passing between them. She was claiming her heritage, giving their son a name that honored where she came from, the accent she had once been told to hide. "It is perfect. He is perfect. Sophia, you are perfect." They spent the next few days in an exhausted, happy haze, learning to care for their newborn, taking turns walking him when he cried, marveling at every small movement and sound. The storm passed, and Lucas rode into town to announce the birth and fetch Mrs. Davies, who came loaded with supplies and eager to meet the baby. "Oh, he is beautiful," she cooed, holding Liam with practiced ease. "Looks just like his father. Poor Sophia, all that work and he takes after Lucas." "I hope he takes after his father," Sophia said. "I hope he grows up strong and kind and gentle, just like Lucas." Mrs. Davies stayed for a week, helping with cooking and cleaning so Sophia could rest and recover. Other neighbors came by once the weather cleared, bringing gifts and congratulations. Sophia watched Lucas with their son, those large hands so careful as he changed diapers and rocked the baby to sleep, and fell in love with him all over again. Spring brought new routines. Sophia returned to teaching part-time, bringing Liam with her into town and letting the older girls take turns holding him during lessons. Lucas finished building a larger barn and bought a few head of cattle, gradually turning their homestead into a working ranch. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. Liam grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair and quick smile. He followed Lucas everywhere, trying to help with chores, learning to ride almost before he could walk. Sophia gave birth to a daughter in 1886, a tiny girl they named Siobhan after Sophia's mother. She had Lucas's blonde, streaked brown hair and Sophia's blue eyes, and she was the light of their lives. 2 years later came another son, Brennan, who had his father's size even as an infant and his mother's stubborn streak. Their home was always full of noise and laughter and love. Lucas proved to be the father Sophia had known he would be, patient and playful, teaching their children about the mountains and the wildlife, showing them how to track and hunt and survive in the wilderness, while also encouraging their education and curiosity. Sophia continued teaching, though with 3 young children she reduced her schedule to just twice a week. The schoolhouse had expanded, and Monticello had grown into a proper town with over 100 families. She loved her work, loved seeing her students learn and grow, but her greatest joy was always coming home to the cabin in the meadow, to Lucas and their children. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch as a family, Lucas with Brennan on his lap, Sophia with Siobhan, and Liam leaning against his father's side. Lucas would tell stories about his adventures in the mountains, and Sophia would sing Irish songs her mother had taught her, her accent strong and clear and unashamed. "Mama, tell us about Ireland," Siobhan would request, and Sophia would describe the green hills and stone cottages, making sure her children knew where they came from, that their heritage was something to be proud of. "Your mother's voice is the most beautiful sound in the world," Lucas would say, kissing Sophia's temple. "Do not ever forget that." The children grew. Liam at 10 was already showing signs of his father's height and build, spending every spare moment following Lucas around the ranch. Siobhan at 8 was bright and curious, always reading, already talking about becoming a teacher like her mother. Brennan at 6 was fearless and affectionate, constantly climbing trees and exploring. In 1892, Sophia discovered she was pregnant again. She was 32 now, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, leaving her exhausted and ill. Lucas worried constantly, hovering even more than usual, until Sophia finally snapped at him that she was fine and he needed to relax. "I already lost so much in my life," he said quietly, his hand on her swollen belly. "I cannot lose you, Sophia. You are everything to me." She softened immediately, pulling him close. "You are not going to lose me, Lucas. I am strong, remember. You said so yourself the night Liam was born." Their second daughter arrived in early spring, a tiny, delicate baby girl they named Maeve. She was perfect and healthy, and Sophia recovered well, though she admitted to Lucas that 4 children was probably enough. "Our family is complete," she said, nursing Maeve while the older children played outside. "I cannot imagine being happier than I am right now." Lucas sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, watching their newborn daughter with wonder. "I spent so many years thinking I was meant to be alone. And now look at us. A wife I love more than breathing, 4 beautiful children, a home, a life I never dared dream of. You gave me all of this, Sophia." "We gave it to each other," she corrected. "You taught me that I did not need to hide who I was. You loved my accent when everyone else said it made me sound foolish. You saw me, Lucas, the real me. That is what changed everything. Best decision I ever made walking into that church to meet the new teacher," he said, leaning down to kiss her. "Getting to hear you say my name every day for the rest of my life. I am the luckiest man alive." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. They weathered harsh winters and drought summers, celebrated births and mourned deaths in their growing community. Monticello thrived, and so did the Quinn family. Lucas taught all 4 children to hunt and track and survive in the wilderness, but he also encouraged their education, sitting with them at the kitchen table while Sophia taught lessons, learning alongside them because he had never had much formal schooling himself. Sophia expanded her teaching to include adult literacy classes in the evenings, and Lucas was her first and most dedicated student. He learned to read and write beyond the basics he had picked up in the army. Devouring books, Sophia brought home and writing careful letters to his siblings back in Missouri, reconnecting with the family he had left behind so many years ago. "You are a good teacher," he told her one night, after successfully reading through an entire chapter of a novel without help. "Patient and kind, just like with the children." "You are a good student," she replied. "Determined and hardworking, just like with everything you do." Their eldest son, Liam, grew into a young man who was almost as large as his father, with the same quiet strength and steady temperament. He talked about becoming a rancher, expanding what Lucas had started, maybe starting his own family someday in these mountains he loved. Siobhan, at 15, was already helping Sophia teach, showing a natural talent for explaining difficult concepts and making learning fun. She wanted to go to normal school, to get formal training as a teacher, and both Lucas and Sophia supported her ambitions completely. Brennan was 12 and still fearless, already talking about joining the cavalry or becoming a scout, wanting adventure beyond their valley. Little Maeve at 6 was sweet and musical, singing constantly in a clear voice that reminded Lucas of Sophia's Irish songs. On their 15th wedding anniversary in February 1898, Lucas surprised Sophia by taking her back to the Overlook, where they had their first real conversation all those years ago. The children stayed with Mrs. Davies, who was now in her 70s but still sharp and energetic, delighted to watch her surrogate grandchildren. They rode up the familiar trail, now in their late 30s, still deeply in love, still best friends and partners in every sense. Lucas spread the same blanket they had used that first time, and they sat looking out over the valley, the town much larger now, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys. 15 years, Lucas said, taking her hand. Feels like yesterday and like forever all at once. The best 15 years of my life, Sophia said. Do you remember what you told me that first time we came here, about how you liked the way I said your name? I remember every word of every conversation we have ever had, Lucas said, but especially that one. The first time I told you your accent was beautiful. I had spent so long thinking it was something to hide, something that made me less, and then you made me see it as something precious, part of who I am. You gave me back to myself, Lucas. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you, surviving but not really living. You showed me what it meant to have a home, a family, a purpose beyond just getting through another day. He pulled a small package from his pocket. I made you something. Sophia unwrapped it carefully to find a carved wooden frame holding a beautiful pressed flower, a larkspur, the delicate blue-purple petals perfectly preserved. Below it, in Lucas's careful handwriting, were the words, "The way you say my name is my favorite sound in all the world. Lucas." Tears filled her eyes. "Lucas, it is beautiful. I will treasure it always. I want you to know every single day how much I love everything about you. Your voice, your accent, your laugh, the way you sing to the children, the way you teach with such patience and passion. All of it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophia Montgomery Quinn. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," she said, kissing him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. "My mountain man, my Lucas." They stayed on that overlook until the sun began to set, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the life they had built together against all odds. Two people who had been wounded by their pasts, who had found healing and love in each other, who had created something beautiful and lasting in the wild mountains of Utah Territory. That evening, back home with their children gathered around the dinner table, Sophia looked at the faces of her family. Liam, strong and steady like his father. Siobhan, bright and ambitious. Brennan, adventurous and brave. Little Maeve, sweet and musical. And Lucas, her husband, her love, her partner in all things, watching her with those gray-green eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Siobhan asked. "Just counting my blessings," Sophia said, her Irish accent as strong as it had been the day she arrived in Monticello 16 years ago. "And feeling very, very grateful." "Tell us a story," Maeve pleaded, "about when you and Papa first met." Lucas and Sophia exchanged a glance, smiling. They had told this story dozens of times, but the children never tired of hearing it. "Well," Sophia began, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, "your father was the biggest, strongest man I had ever seen, and when he walked into that little church where I was teaching, I thought he must be some kind of legend come to life. And your mother," Lucas continued, picking up the thread, "was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. But what really caught my attention was her voice. The way she spoke, with this accent that made everything sound like music, especially my name." "Say it, Mama," Brennan urged. "Say Papa's name the way you always do." "Lucas," Sophia said, letting the Irish lilt color the word, making it soft and musical exactly the way she had said it that very first day. Lucas's eyes softened, just as they always did. "There it is. My favorite sound in the whole world. Did Papa really think you sounded foolish, Mama?" Liam asked. He knew the full story, knew about the broken engagement and the aunt who had criticized her accent. "Some people did," Sophia admitted. "But your father taught me that what other people think does not matter as much as what we know to be true about ourselves. He taught me to be proud of where I come from, to celebrate my heritage instead of hiding it. And your mother taught me that I did not have to keep running from my past," Lucas added. "That I could build a future, a real life with love and family and purpose. We saved each other, in a lot of ways." The children absorbed this, as they always did, understanding on a deeper level each time they heard the story. How their parents had found each other against all odds, how love had healed old wounds, how two broken people had created something whole and beautiful together. Later, after the children were in bed, Lucas and Sophia stood on their porch under the stars, the mountains' dark shapes against the night sky. Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked you to walk with me that first time, for giving me a chance, for loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family, for everything." Sophia turned in his arms, looking up at his bearded face. Even after 15 years and 4 children, he still looked at her like she was something precious and miraculous. "Thank you for seeing me," she replied. "The real me, for loving my accent instead of trying to change it, for making me feel like I was enough, exactly as I was. For being the best husband and father I could have imagined. For everything." They kissed under the stars, still as in love as they had been on that first walk to the overlook, still discovering new depths to their connection. The Wild West had been kind to them. These mountains had given them a home, and they had built something lasting together. Years continued to unfold. Liam married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring valley, and started expanding the family ranch, building his own cabin just a mile from his parents' home. Siobhan went to normal school in Salt Lake City and returned to teach in Monticello, eventually becoming the head teacher when Sophia finally retired at 50. Brennan did join the cavalry, serving with distinction before returning home to become a deputy sheriff in Monticello, using his tracking skills and his father's lessons to help keep the growing town safe. Maeve married a merchant's son and filled her home with music and laughter and eventually children of her own. Lucas and Sophia became grandparents, delighting in the new generation. Lucas taught his grandchildren to carve and track and survive in the wilderness, just as he had taught their parents. Sophia sang Irish songs to them and told them stories about the green hills of Cork, making sure they knew where their family came from. They grew older together, Lucas's hair going gray and Sophia's gaining silver streaks. Lucas moved a bit slower after a lifetime of hard physical work, but he was still strong, still protective, still looked at Sophia like she was the center of his universe. Sophia's voice remained as musical as ever, her accent never fading, a point of pride rather than shame. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration in the church where they had married, the whole town coming out to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Lucas and Sophia danced slowly to fiddle music, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, grateful for every day they had been given together. 30 years, Sophia murmured against his chest. Where did the time go? Into building something beautiful, Lucas replied. No regrets. Not a single one. Just that I did not meet you sooner, but I am grateful for every moment we have had. They lived well into their 70s, watching Monticello grow from a frontier settlement into a prosperous town, watching their children raise families of their own, watching the Wild West gradually become a little less wild. But the mountains remained, constant and beautiful, and their love remained just as constant, just as beautiful. Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night in 1918, Sophia beside him as she had been for 35 years. His last words were her name, said with the same love and reverence he had always shown. Sophia. She held his hand and whispered back, Lucas, her accent strong and clear, the way he had always loved it. Sophia lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, teaching until the very end, sharing stories about the mountain man who had loved her accent, who had taught her to be proud of who she was. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1923, and her children buried her beside Lucas on a hillside overlooking their meadow, the mountains stretching endlessly beyond. Their love story became legend in Monticello, passed down through generations. The story of the Irish teacher who had been told her accent made her sound foolish, and the mountain man who loved the way his name sounded on her lips. The story of two wounded souls who found healing in each other, who built a life and a family in the wild mountains of Utah, who proved that love could overcome anything when two people truly saw and valued each other. Their descendants still live in the area, still tell the story, still visit the hillside where Lucas and Sophia rest together. The cabin they built still stands, preserved by the family, a testament to what they created together. And in the evening when the wind blows through the pines, locals swear you can sometimes hear the echo of an Irish accent, soft and musical, saying a name with love, Lucas. Their story reminds everyone who hears it that the things others tell us are flaws, the parts of ourselves we are taught to hide or change, might be exactly what someone else will love most about us. That true love sees us completely and celebrates everything we are. That sometimes the person who saves us is the one who teaches us we never needed saving in the first place. We just needed to see ourselves through eyes of love instead of judgment. Lucas and Sophia Quinn lived a full, rich life together in the mountains of Utah Territory, raising 4 children who became upstanding citizens and loving parents themselves, contributing to their community, building something lasting and good. But more than that, they loved each other completely, without reservation, exactly as they were. And in the end, that is the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind.